As we're only a couple months away from the US presidential elections taking place, it's worth looking back to see how previous occurrences have impacted the Bitcoin price. Today, we're going to be looking at how the US presidential election is likely to impact BTC, and where better to start than the S&P 500 versus Bitcoin year-on-year chart we have here on bitcoinmagazinepro.com. So what I'm going to do is just remove the BTC year-on-year data here, and if I just move myself over a little bit. The presidential elections take place every 4 years on the first Tuesday of November. So if we can look back here, we can see how the S&P 500 has reacted to these events. And given Bitcoin's historic correlation with the S&P 500, we can kind of assume that the S&P is to react very positively. That is probably going to have a good influence on the Bitcoin price action as well. So back here in November 2012, we can see that the year-on-year rate and change in the S&P 500 was about 11%. But in the year that followed, this increased to around 32%, which was a very noticeable increase in the S&P 500 over that year following that election. It's a very similar story in 2016. We can see here that in November 2016, this was somewhere around, if I can find it, 7% at the time, and then it increased to around 22% a year later. In 2022, again, similar story. This was hovering at around 17, 18, 16% around the area. And a year later, we were looking at S&P 500 year-on-year rate of change of somewhere a little bit closer to 29, 28, 27% potentially. So obviously, this is having a positive influence on the S&P 500 and subsequently the Bitcoin price action. If we go over to this chart here, we can also see that this isn't just isolated to the last 3 elections that we've had during Bitcoin's life. If we go to the S&P 500 chart we have here on TradingView, if I just hide myself, and we can see that in almost every single one of these occurrences, the price a year later was significantly higher in the S&P 500. The only instance in the past 4 decades where this wasn't the case was the dot-com bubble in 2000, when a year later we were still in a little bit of a recession. So given the fact that this is taking place in just a couple months' time, it's actually pretty positive for equities, given the fact that historically this has had a very positive influence on the price action. And if we go to BTC to see the influence as well, just on the BTC USD chart here, what I've done is outline the previous 3 instances where this has occurred, and we can see obviously this has always had a very positive influence on the Bitcoin price action. But one thing we can also do, if I just turn myself back on here, is look to see if we were to mimic any of these previous year price action periods following US elections, how that might look given the current Bitcoin price action. Now, obviously, we can't know exactly what the Bitcoin price is going to be in a few weeks' time, but given the fact that we've been at around $60,000 for what seems like forever now, if we just assume a $60,000 price at the time of election, we can see here that this green line is the most recent cycle we had, so the 2020 election event. The orange one is the 2016 election, and then the red line will be the 2012 election back here. We can see that in every single instance, it'll result in a pretty nice amount of a price appreciation for BTC. We can see that in the most recent one, which would be the bearish outcome, I suppose, we could see a Bitcoin price action of $250,000, which would be nice. The orange line would be somewhere close to $500,000, and then the red one would be pretty much $1 million. So interesting how they've both multiplied every time. By that regard, maybe we can see a Bitcoin price, if we're halving each time, of potentially $125,000. But you have to acknowledge that these are not cherry-picked dates because I've just used a flat year, but in the 2016 cycle, for example, we actually continued to rally substantially higher than that. In the 2020, we didn't rally too much higher than that, but then again, in 2012, we actually had the double peak cycle where we went significantly higher than that. So this is just a rough estimate. Of course, none of this is definitely going to come to fruition, but we can definitely say historically this has been a very bullish period of time for BTC. Now, of course, there's no guarantees that it's going to continue in that regard, but historically all the data is pointing towards the next few months being a little bit more bullish for BTC. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. And make sure to check out all the resources we've discussed today, as well as the many more that are all available on bitcoinmagazinepro.com, your #1 source for Bitcoin analysis. So just to summarize, every US election has resulted in significantly higher BTC prices in the year that follows. And we're currently less than 2 months away from the next presidential election, which is occurring on the first Tuesday in November. And this phenomenon is not specific to BTC. In fact, it's positively influencing all risk on markets, especially those in the US, especially US equity indexes like the S&P 500, which we can see over the past 4 decades has almost always had a very positive reaction in price following this event. One thing we also didn't touch on in this video, because frankly I forgot to mention it, was it doesn't seem to be influenced too much by which party wins the election. Historically, it's not really made too much difference whether it was the Republicans or the Democrats that won. So hopefully, regardless of the outcome, we do see some positive influence on the Bitcoin price. If you like this video, then please visit bitcoinmagazinepro.com, where our analytics help you to cut through the noise to make informed, data-driven decisions about Bitcoin. With over 150 live charts, personalized indicator alerts, in-depth crypto industry reports, API access, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And let me know what your thoughts are on the upcoming US presidential election. Who do you think is going to win? Do you think it's going to be bullish for BTC? Or do you maybe think that this is going to be one of those times where Bitcoin reacts bearishly in the year that follows? As I said, let me know in the comments below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to all the good ones. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.